Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Guy, and I am the Student Project Supervisor at the Clark Forum for Contemporary Issues. On behalf of the Clark Forum, Scholars for Peace in the Middle East Central Pennsylvania Chapter, the Jewish Federation of Greater Harrisburg, and Dickinson College, it is my honor to introduce this afternoon's speaker, Israeli Ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. On May 14, 1948, the same day the State of Israel declared its independence, the United States under President Truman became the first nation to recognize the new country. Since that day, the relationship between Israel and the United States has been a crucial component of both countries' foreign policies. With recent events in the Middle East and the apparent threat of nuclear weapon capability in Iran, understanding this relationship is more important than ever. Ambassador Oren brings an exceptional set of experiences and qualifications to these issues. A graduate of Princeton and Columbia, Ambassador Oren served as an officer in the Israel Defense Forces, as a paratrooper in the Lebanon War, and a liaison with the U.S. Sixth Fleet during the Gulf War. He has served as an advisor to Israel's delegation to the United Nations and as the nation's director of interreligious affairs. On May 3, 2009, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appointed him to his current position, Israeli Ambassador to the United States. At this time, I would like to ask that you please turn off all cell phones and electronic devices. Please refrain from using cameras, videos, or any recording devices as they are not permitted. A video of the lecture will be available at clarkforum.org. A question and answer session will follow today's lecture, so please hold all questions until that time. And now, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Michael Oren.
Thank you. I may be over-mic'd. Hold it. Is that better? Can you hear me? No. Back. Under-mic'd. Irrespective, I'm delighted to be at Dickinson College today. Thank you. Thank you all for receiving me so warmly. I want to thank President Durden. Thank you so much for hosting me, you and your wife, and Provost Neil Weissman, to our Consul General, Daniel Kutner. Where's Daniel? Daniel, thank you very much, and to Lou Boucher, who is in charge of academic outreach and making me get here today, the head of my office here, Lee Moser, who is somewhere in the audience, and for Scholars of Peace in the Middle East. Thank you all for hosting me and making this possible. Where to begin? Let me begin with a couple of vignettes, okay? Just little pictures from the life of an ambassador of Israel to the United States. I get an invitation to fly from Israel to the USS Harry Truman, an aircraft carrier, one of America's 12 aircraft carriers, that is sailing between the coast of Turkey and the island of Rhodes. The occasion is the 60th anniversary of the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. And they tell me I'm going to fly out there to address 5,200 crew members on the history of U.S.-Israel relations. Okay. So I show up at a remote airstrip near Ben Gurion Airport. There's a U.S. Navy plane there, nice pilots. They stick me in there, put a bunch of earmuffs on me, fly off. They never tell me that when you land on this thing, you go from 188 miles an hour to 0 in something less than a second. So that when you land, you're here and your eyeballs are somewhere up there. They thought this was very funny. I was convinced we would crash. And I walk out, and there's this American city in the middle of the Mediterranean, and all the officers standing at attention. And during the course of the day, I got to meet with groups of sailors, officers, and to tell them about the history of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Next image. I go visit Colorado, Denver. I'm in Colorado, Denver, and I get invited to speak to a joint session of the House of Representatives, the Assembly of Denver and of Colorado, and they pass a joint resolution expressing unequivocal, unreserved support for the U.S.-Israel relationship. And this act of legislation, the part of the people of Colorado, passes absolutely unanimously. No abstentions, no negative votes. Colorado. About a month and a half ago, I was in Cincinnati. Cincinnati, don't make fun of it. It was listed by Lonely Planet as the most exciting city in the United States, Cincinnati. And I go to the New Jerusalem African American Baptist Church on a Sunday morning. And I walk into this African American Baptist church Sunday morning, and I am greeted, to say it exuberantly would be an understatement, greeted rapturously by this entire congregation. What is that about? How do we explain all of these different scenes in which an Israeli ambassador to the United States can find himself on any given day? And the answer goes back. The answer goes back not to 1948 when Israel was created. It goes back much, much further than that, basically about 4 centuries. It goes back to the day back at the beginning of the 17th century when that first buckled shoe lit on a certain stone off the Massachusetts shore. And the owner of that buckled shoe, a gentleman by the name of William Bradshaw, who had come with 101 Puritan pilgrims from England, he made a certain declaration. He said, "Come, let us rejoice of the word of the Lord in Zion." Now, Massachusetts is a very nice state, but I wouldn't necessarily equate it with Zion. But William Bradford did. And William Bradford came from this Puritan tradition, which had looked at this Bible in an attempt to help them overcome their great oppression at the hands of the Church of England. Looking for a biblical model, they didn't find it in the New Testament. They found it in what they called the Hebrew Old Testament. They found something very extraordinary there. They found a God who spoke directly to his people in their own language. It's a fact not to be taken for granted. God speaks to the human race, as far as we know, only in one language, and that is Hebrew. And they loved the story. They loved the story of the escape of the children of Israel from Egypt. They became the children of Israel. England became Egypt. The Atlantic Ocean became the Sinai. And this country became the New World. And when they came here, they gave 1,000 Hebrew names to their towns and cities. You know, your Sharons and your Bethlehems and your Jerichos, you Long Island folks. All right, Bethany. It's in Jerusalem, Bethany. And Bethpage is in Jerusalem, too. And a lot of Long Island names. And they gave Hebrew names to their children, and they called them Sarah and Jacob and Isaac and Rebekah. They made Hebrew a required language at their colleges. James Madison was a Hebrew major at Princeton, and he failed. Had to do an extra year because trust me, I'm sorry, I know you're a Hebrew teacher here. It labors mightily to teach you Hebrew. It's a tough language. And certainly James Madison thought there. 1783, I understand, is an important date for this college. In 1783, at the conclusion of the American Revolutionary War, there was a big debate in Congress over what was to be the Great Seal of the United States of America. And there were some people who thought that the Great Seal should be the bald eagle, clutching 13 arrows in its talons, one for every state. But there was another group of American leaders who said, no, the symbol of the United States of America should show Moses leading the children of Israel out of bondage into the Promised Land. And there was this heated debate going on about what was going to be the Great Seal. And alas, Moses lost out to the follically challenged bird. But close call. America almost had Moses as its national symbol. That Moses symbol was designed by no less than Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. So deeply was ingrained the biblical Hebrew story in the minds and hearts of the founding fathers and mothers of this nation. Now, for many of those founding fathers and mothers, the notion that this was the new Israel, this was the new promised land, meant that they had a strong kinship relationship with the old Israel, that is the Jews, and with the old promised land, the land of Israel. And they concluded that to be good Christians, to be good Americans, it was their God-given or God-ordained duty to help those old Jews get back to their old promised land and recreate their ancient state. Thus was born the notion of restorationism, what we later called Zionism. And it was not a peripheral notion in post-colonial America at all. John Adams, the second president of the United States, said it was his fondest dream that someday a Jewish army, 100,000 strong, would march back into Judea and reclaim it as a Jewish kingdom. Abraham Lincoln, in 1863, said that it was his vision to help the Jews restore their ancient sovereignty in their homeland, and he pledged to help realize that vision once he had restored unity within this country after the Civil War. Woodrow Wilson, who was the grandson and son of Presbyterian ministers, said that he had no greater privilege than to help restore the Jews to their ancient homeland, and he was instrumental in persuading what became the League of Nations to grant the British a mandate over what then was called Palestine to help recreate that Jewish state. And after that state was created, announced its creation on May 14th, 1948, Harry Truman, as you heard from Andrew, Harry Truman made the United States the first nation on earth to recognize the recreated Jewish state, then calling itself Israel. By no means an easy call. Basically, his entire foreign policy establishment, the State Department, the Defense Department, the Pentagon told him not to do it. It would get America embroiled in a war in the Middle East. It would result in a cutoff of oil. And Truman, no, he went ahead and made the United States this first nation to recognize Israel. Why did he do it? Because Truman claimed to have memorized the Old Testament, and that he was a member of a restorationist group called the Christian Committee for Palestine. And asked why he went against the advice of all of his chief advisors, Truman had one word. He said, "I'm Cyrus. I'm Cyrus." Those of you who know your Bible know that Cyrus was the ancient Persian king who rescued the Jews from exile, helped return them to their promised land, just like those early restorationists in post-colonial America. Now, America is a very spiritual country. More people attend a house of worship of one type or another, a church, a mosque, a synagogue, per week in this country than in any other industrialized country. And for those people reading their Bible, and God is very clear about his promise to the Jewish people to restore them, to enable them to rebuild their homeland, and people take their Bible very seriously, that becomes an important component in what later becomes the American-Israel relationship. And it's not just evangelicals. Evangelicals make up for about 20% of the population of the United States. Support for Israel today in the United States is close to an all-time high. About 71% of Americans define themselves as pro-Israel. So the other 50%, Jews are about a little bit over 2%. So the other 50% are other people who, for many reasons, but a principal reason being a spiritual tie, feel a strong affinity to this recreated Jewish state. Israel comes into being in 1948 not just as a Jewish state. Israel comes into being as a democratic state. It is the only functioning and functional democracy in the Middle East. And the fact that Israel shares America's core values, the rule of law, representative government, equality between not just sexual equality, equality between races, between ethnicities, minority rights, all of that creates another stratum in the U.S.-Israel relationship. And Israel is democracy on steroids. Trust me. You know, if someone, sometimes I was in the State of the Union, the first State of the Union address, listening to President Obama address Congress, and someone yelled out they began to heckle him from the floor of the Congress, and it made the front page news. This happens to the Prime Minister of Israel every single day. It never makes the front page news. We basically have to sort of screw down the seats in our representative assembly in the Knesset. A very rambunctious democracy with a hyper-free press, with freedom of assembly. Last summer we had our social protest movement, our sort of our Wall Street type of opposed Wall Street movement. We had 400,000 people come out to the streets. That would be the equivalent of about 15 million Americans come out to the streets. No disturbances. The police were there, basically protecting the protesters. Freedoms of assembly are guarded. We have there have been some questions in the press about women's rights in Israel. Israel has been a pioneer in women's rights. We have, of course, had a female prime minister, Golda Meir, you remember. And about today, there are about 24 women members of our Knesset out of a body of 120, 4 members of the government, 4 cabinet members, a general on our Joint Chiefs of Staff. Just until recently, the Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, the heads of our opposition parties are all women. A Supreme Court panel of 3 judges, 2 women and 1 Arab, recently sent to prison a former president of Israel for sexual offenses. So nobody's above the law in the state of Israel. We are a pioneering country in the field of gay rights. We never had don't ask, don't tell. We're a nation at arms. We have a citizens' armies. Never had don't ask, don't tell. Complete equality for same-sex couples in the state of Israel. We've had, in places like Jerusalem, it's one of the few issues where the ultra-Orthodox rabbis will get together with the imams, together with the priests, to oppose International Gay Pride Day. Every year, the state ensures that International Gay Pride Day parade takes place, even in the city of Jerusalem. So a world leader in that field as well. Democracy. Democracy creates an immense bond between Israel and the United States. You go to cities in the United States, there'll be streets named for Ben Gurion, streets named for Golda Meir. They are in New York City. Go to downtown Jerusalem, where I live. You can visit Washington Street and Lincoln Street. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has a memorial for John F. Kennedy. It has a memorial for Martin Luther King, actually right down the street from my house. We actually mark Martin Luther King Day in Israel. We are the only country in the Middle East that has a memorial for 9/11, a very large memorial just outside of Jerusalem. And we're the only country in the Middle East that has a park named for and including an exact replica of the Liberty Bell Park in downtown Jerusalem. Come and see it. Democracy. We had all of this connection, the spiritual connection, the democratic connection. What we did not have was a strategic military tie. We did not. You may recall some 44 plus years ago, Israel fought a war, the 6-Day War, very influential war. In many ways, we're still dealing with its aftermath. But Israel fought that war without a single American bullet. We were supplied by the French back then. They were our strategic allies. The United States did not have. In fact, the United States had an arms embargo on the state of Israel stemming back from the War of Independence in 1948. But it was on the 7th day of that conflict that the morning after, that American policymakers in Washington woke up and said, whoa, there is this little superpower in the Middle East that just defeated a number of Soviet-backed armies, and we really should have an alliance with that country. We're not allied with that country. You know, they've been supporting us at the Cold War, they've supported us in Korea, but we don't really have a strategic alliance. We should be aligned with them. Thus was born, literally, on the day after the 6-Day War, was born the U.S.-Israel Strategic Alliance, which has just blossomed and expanded ever since to so many different areas. We trained together, our troops trained together, our special forces trained together. The operation against bin Laden, right? Remember Admiral McRaven was the commander of that? His thesis was on the Entebbe raid in 1976, his doctoral thesis. He worked with our special forces. We developed weapons systems together, particularly defensive weapons systems together. Israel has developed a weapons system that will protect armored vehicles, tanks, from armored penetrating shells, knock them right out of the air. Together we have developed the world's most advanced anti-ballistic systems. Arrow 2, Arrow 3 for ICBMs coming in, for medium-range rockets and cruise missiles, David's Sling, and now in the press, most recently, the Iron Dome system for short-range ballistic missiles. The Iron Dome system was a system developed in Israel. It went from drawing board to deployment within 4 years, probably a world record. And now in the last year, Iron Dome has become the only anti-ballistic system to prove effective in combat situations. As recently as 2 weeks ago, this Iron Dome system took down 60 terrorist rockets that were launched from Gaza at Israel, at our southern city. 60 rockets that might have hit downtown and could have triggered a war in the Middle East. And just yesterday, the Pentagon announced that it is going to upgrade its support for the Iron Dome system, and we're deeply grateful for that. Israeli unmanned vehicles, drone vehicles, patrol the skies above American forces. They're actually involved in the war against drugs in this hemisphere. American Israeli technology used in defending American troops against improvised explosive devices that have caused so many casualties both in Iraq and in Afghanistan. We provide armor. We provide armor. You know, remember we're getting now to ancient history. At the beginning of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, a lot of controversy over in this country about how many vehicles were sent over there without armoring. Remember this, some of us? And there's a little kibbutz in northern Galilee, kibbutz actually founded by Americans in 1948, that came up with a sort of a do-it-yourself armoring kit. And Kibbutz Sasa, for those who want to know. And as of today, Kibbutz Sasa has armored 20,000 U.S. vehicles that have been serving formerly in Iraq, still in Afghanistan. And at the embassy, we received the thank you notes from the parents and even the grandparents of the crews that have been saved by this armoring. It's quite extraordinary. We not only fight side by side with the United States, we're involved in saving lives. In addition to armoring, we make medical equipment. We make a high-tech bandage that stops bleeding very, very fast. It has an internal pressuring system. And that bandage proved critical in saving the life of Congresswoman Gabriella Gifford. Remember the Congresswoman who was shot in Arizona? And the SWAT team that was present at the time of her shooting just happened to have one of these Israeli bandages and happened to apply it very quickly, and it saved her life. It saved her life. We have now supplied 1 million of these bandages to U.S. forces fighting overseas, and they have literally saved not just limbs but lives. Together, the United States and Israel embark on humanitarian missions around the world through cooperation with the U.S. military and the State Department. Israelis were the first on the ground with a fully equipped medical team in earthquake-devastated Haiti. We have sent a medical team together with the United States to Japan. We are involved in agricultural development projects, educational development projects, medical advanced teams, women empowerment projects throughout Africa and in South America. So the whole humanitarian field is huge. So you have these three sort of pillars of the U.S.'s relationships: the spiritual pillar, the common shared democratic values, the strategic alliance, which is now, again, as it's spread into so many different fields. But there are emerging areas still that are reinforcing these unbreakable historic bonds between the United States and Israel. One of those areas that really surprised me since coming into this field, I had done a lot of work as a scholar in the history and the evolution of the U.S.'s relationship. I was unaware of the burgeoning commercial relationship between these two countries. Today, Israel is America's 12th largest customer in the world. America does more business with Israel, tiny Israel, 8 million people, than it does with Russia, than it does with Argentina, that it does with Saudi Arabia, that it does with Spain. Extraordinary. It's in the last decade, America has invested somewhere in the vicinity of $80 billion in Israel. Israelis have invested about $55 billion in the United States at a time when American companies are outsourcing to Asia, to China, to India. Israeli companies are outsourcing to the United States. Tens of thousands of Americans are employed in Israeli companies, some of them right here in Pennsylvania. Teva, for example, the pharmaceutical company, is the world's largest generic drug company. You shouldn't have to take these drugs, but 1 out of every 5 pills taken by Americans in this country is a Teva pill. It's an Israeli company, Israeli-owned company. Employs thousands of Americans. It's particularly in the field of high tech. In the field of high tech, Israel is a world's leader in high tech. Virtually all of your major high tech companies have R&D centers in Israel, whether Motorola, Google, Apple just opened an R&D center. Intel has 2 R&D centers in Israel. All of your computers, all of your cell phones are operating on Israeli concepts or actually Israeli products. You can't use your computer without having Israel inside. If it's got Intel inside, it's got us inside. We make those microprocessors. You know that little app, that little application on your computer that when you begin to type in a search and it gives you a list of the words, it's intuitive? That's an Israeli invention. We invented that. About 70% of your LCD screens, whether on your cell phones or on your computers, are made in Israel. So it is an immensely important relationship, commercial relationship. Israel, tiny Israel, is the 3rd most represented country on the NASDAQ exchange after the United States and China. That's how big it is. And that part of the U.S.'s relationship is just going to get larger and larger. Now, does this mean we agree on everything? Guess what? We do not. We do not. And I tell you, if some of you study history in this room, look back at some of the closest alliances in history, the United States and Britain during World War II, there were lots of disagreements back then, and we do have our disagreements. We've had disagreements particularly on the tactical aspects of the peace process, actually how to get to where we want to go. The United States has a long-standing disagreement with Israel over our settlement policy, over our policy on Jerusalem. We regard Jerusalem as our united and eternal capital. The United States, in a very anomalous relationship with an ally, does not recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. For the record, we recognize Washington, D.C. as America's capital. But these tactical differences today are, in fact, much smaller. We agree on the need for direct talks between us and the Palestinians without preconditions to reach a 2-state solution based on a Jewish state, which is the nation state of the Jewish people, side by side with the nation state of the Palestinian people, Palestine, that will live together in mutual security, mutual recognition, and peace. We're against the involvement of terrorist organizations in this process. Very much see eye to eye. We see eye to eye on much of what's occurring across the Middle East, what has been called the Arab Spring. We prefer to call it the Arab upheaval, whether it be in Syria or in Egypt. We are in close communication. We could not be in closer communication daily about this, and we have very, very similar aspects. The Iranian situation, an area where there could be very wide disagreement, but in fact, again, on the core issues, we look at the same intelligence, and our intelligence sharing is vast, friends, vast. Not just on Iran, but on the entire Middle East, but on Iran in particular, we see the same things, we draw many of the same conclusions. President Obama, in his recent speech to AIPAC, made some very important points. All options are on the table, he said, which is our policy. One of those options is a military option, but one of the options is also a diplomatic option. We also have a diplomatic option. Containment is not an option. We agree. Containment is not an option. And I think very significantly, the President said that Israel has a right to defend itself against any Middle Eastern threat or any combination of Middle Eastern threats. Israel is a sovereign country, and only Israel can decide how best to ensure its security, and we very much appreciate that expression on the part of President Obama. Israel, the United States. I can only assure you that today, 2012, there is not a country in the world that enjoys a deeper and more multifaceted relationship with the United States than the State of Israel. Because of these great spiritual ties, democratic ties, the strategic cooperation, there's really nothing like it anywhere in the world. And as we look forward into the future, when we look into this Middle East of such profound uncertainty, there's only one factor which is absolutely certain. It is ineluctably certain, and that is that there will remain one state, albeit small, one state that is exquisitely well situated geographically, which has an army which is more than twice as large as the British and the French armies combined. It is a country that is democratic. It is a country that is pro-American without reservation. You will never see protests against the United States. You'll never see American flags being burnt there. It is a country which is very stable. And in the world in which we live today, that there is no substitute for that type of ally. No substitute, nothing like it. Israel is not just an ally of the United States. Israel, I firmly believe, is America's ultimate ally. Thank you. It's okay. Thank you. Questions, please. And any question, as long as it's a question, will be treated respectfully and will be answered if I can.
Yep. Yes, please raise your hand and the microphone will be brought to you. And out of respect to the speaker and others in the audience, please keep questions under 30 seconds. Thank you.
I have a question just about sort of your daily routine, and I'm curious what the structure is of your communication with with the government, with the Prime Minister. Is it a daily exchange? Are you ever surprised by something you see in the newspaper?
Never.
Okay.
Never. I look at the papers every day like this, I should put my cards on the table. Professor Devaney is what we call broadly in my world mishpucha. We're almost related. And we were sitting we were having a picnic a couple years back, and he was talking about Dickinson College, and I was thinking, boy, I'd love to come there. And it's really because of him that I got here today. So thank you very much, Professor Devaney, Ward. The role of ambassador of Israel to the United States. We have a special relationship with the United States, clearly. And I have a desk, maybe twice as big as this podium here. Around that desk on one side are 535 members of Congress. There's the State Department. There's the National Security Council. There's the White House. There's the Pentagon, Ministry of Defense, the Department of Defense, Commerce. Commerce is increasingly important. There's the American Jewish community in all of its variations. There's the American press, the American Jewish press. There are the Christian communities, the African American communities, the Latino communities, all on that side of the desk. On the other side of the desk is Israel, with 120 members of Knesset, 30 members of the government, the Israeli press, the Israeli Defense Forces, Israeli intelligence services. All of that is coming across this desk. There's also about 150 people in the embassy who also want to get across that desk. At any given moment of every day, and Lee Moser will tell you that there is a tremendous struggle of what the ambassador is going to do for that particular second. And my schedule is sometimes set 5-6 months in advance for something as small as a lunch or a telephone call. Because it is so diverse and so intense. When I come home at night, and I sometimes come home at night rather late, and I greet my wife, I literally can't remember what I did in the morning because it was so different. Any given day, I can start my day at the White House in a meeting with the National Security Council. I can then go to the State Department for a meeting with the Deputy Secretary of State, or deputies. I will then cross the Potomac to the Pentagon and meet with the Pentagon. Up to the Hill to meet with members of the Senate or members of the legislature. I will then brief, the New York Times board in Washington. I will meet with church leaders. I'll be dealing with various representatives of the American Jewish community. Run to television, do an interview, do Jon Stewart, and glad to get out there with my skin still on. Terrifying. All in a given day. And it can be sometimes quite breathless, but it's infinitely rewarding. And for an ADHD person like me, I don't honestly know how I go back to writing books after this, because those of you who write books know you got to lock yourself in a room back. So that's how the day is scheduled, and you can't do everything possible. I'd love to be able to go to, there are about 3,000 campuses in this country, and I can only get out of Washington so often and only visit so many campuses. Unfortunately, I'm able to visit 2 today, but certainly I'd love to go to more. So, oh, you want to know about that aspect? Yes. Oh boy, all the time we're running in and out of meetings, talking back and forth. I'll give you an I intimated earlier that the Pentagon issued a statement yesterday saying it was going to upgrade America's support for the Iron Dome system. And that involved an immense amount of communications back and forth about how this is going to go. They have to understand what our needs are. People in Congress want to know how they can help. I had written an op-ed about a week and a half ago about the success of Iron Dome, which got a great amount of attention on the Hill, and people want to know how they can help. So that all that has to be coordinated, and it has to be coordinated with different groups in Israel. You have to coordinate between the Minister of Defense, the Prime Minister, our National Security Council, our Congressional Liaison, and our Foreign Ministry. Everybody has to be on the same page. Everybody has to be using the same terms. Everyone has to be using the same numbers, the same nomenclature. It is quite an assignment, and occasionally we actually succeed at it. Amazing. Hi.
On a book called The Unmaking of Israel by Gershon
Written by
Gorenberg.
my neighbor and friend.
I'm sure.
Gershon Gorenberg. Yeah.
Who is both Orthodox
He is.
and, as I understand that, more or less of a political moderate. He's former editor of the Jerusalem Post and of the Jerusalem Report. And trying to encapsulate his basic thesis, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the way I read it was that his feeling is that the religious fundamentalism in Israel, as well as the extremist, the messianist aspect of the settler enterprise in the West Bank, is fundamentally undermining democracy or making moves in that direction, and that historically that's been done with the collusion at times of various Israeli governments. Mm-hmm. Would you care to comment on that?
Well, it's 4 different questions. Let's see if I break it down. Let's say, is religious extremism threatening democracy in Israel? All right. That's one aspect of it. What degree has there been collusion of governments? That's his word, collusion, or cooperation of government with the settlement process or enterprise. And I'll add one because I know Gershon very well. I don't think he defined himself as a political moderate, but to what degree has this both aspects impact the peace process and the chances for peace? Am I fair in adding that one? Yeah, Gershon would definitely use the word collusion. Okay, I know. Okay, first of all, let's talk about settlements in general. Why are they there? How did they come to there? Why have various Israeli governments going back to 1967, labor governments, Likud governments, why have they supported settlements? Understand, first of all, that this is a Jewish state. It is not a theocracy. We are the nation state of the Jewish people. Unlike Britain or Denmark, we do not have a national religion, but we are a nation state, like Ireland, like Bulgaria. And as the nation state of the Jewish people, our state is situated on the tribal lands, if you will, of the Jewish people. This is the cradle of Jewish civilization. But if you look in your Bible, you won't find Haifa. If you look in your Bible, you'll find Ashkelon and Ashdod, but they're not Jewish cities, they're Philistine cities. What you will find is Bethlehem, Jericho, Ophrah, Hebron, Jerusalem. These are the Jewish cities, and many of them happen to be located in what you call the West Bank. We call Judea and Samaria. So these are our tribal lands. For a Jewish state, a Jewish nation state, so constituted, to tell a Jew that he or she cannot live in their own homeland is virtually impossible. Virtually impossible. In addition, there was a strategic reason for these settlements. The strategic reason was that Israel, pre-1967, at its most populous and its most industrially centered, was all of 8 miles wide, with our back to the sea and our faces to the mountains. So we didn't have defensible borders. So most of the settlements were designed to thicken out Israel's borders and to give us a defensible borders. The 67 lines were not defensible. And in many cases, this was achieved. Why then would we be talking about a two-state solution? Why would we support the creation of a Palestinian state, and we all know where that state's going to be, and it's going to involve painful sacrifices of areas which have been the patrimony of the Jewish people for 3,000 years? That is only one reason, and that's because there is another people, the Palestinian people, who also view this as their homeland and view it as their patrimony, and because we have concluded, after many struggles, we've concluded that the only way we can ever live together is by sharing this land. And we know, and the Prime Minister Netanyahu, has told last May a joint session of Congress, by the way, another example of the U.S.-Israel relationship, one of the few foreign leaders ever to be invited twice to address a joint session of Congress. He said openly, we understand that some of these settlements are not going to be part of Israel. We're going to have to give them up. Or they're going to have to be part of the Palestinian state, whatever, but they're not going to be within our borders. So the answer to one of these questions is that settlements are not the impediment. We negotiated with the Palestinians for, 16 years with settlements. We made peace with Egypt, with Jordan, while there were settlements. We removed 21 settlements, 9,000 people from Gaza to try to make peace with the people in Gaza, and we didn't get peace, we got rockets. So that wasn't the answer, wasn't settlements right there. So I'm going to take issue with my friend Gershom, both on the fact that settlements are the impediment, that they're going to block peace, that various governments have supported settlements, yes, but there was a reason for it. That I'll agree. And then finally, the question of democracy. Is the settlement movement somehow threatening democracy? Well, I took part, wasn't read, so I guess it was read in my resume, Andrew, that I spent a long time in the Israeli army, 30 years. I was in a couple of wars. The most traumatic thing I ever did was my involvement in the 2005 withdrawal from Gaza. There's nothing more traumatic than going into a house and taking out screaming people. Just horrendous. It was the largest single Israeli military operation since the 1973 war. 55,000 Israeli soldiers had to be called up to remove these 9,000 settlers. And what you saw was Israeli democracy in action. As painful as this was, the people of Israel made a decision, an incredible decision, an excruciating decision. We made the decision. That was democracy in action. Democracy is an action in many ways that I mentioned during my talk, whether it's in sending a former Israeli president to prison for sexual offenses, for rulings of the Supreme Court that often go against the settlers, go against the army. The army has built a defensive barrier between the West Bank to stop suicide bombers from infiltrating. Palestinians have appealed to our Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has found repeatedly in the Palestinians' favor and made the army move that barrier, sometimes even endangering our citizens. So I would take strong objection and reservation to the notion that Israeli democracy is in any way threatened by this settler situation. And the settler population overwhelmingly is not radical. Overwhelmingly, we're talking about people, the radical fringe of it is tiny compared to them, and most people are people like any one of us who live in a community that is a 5-minute commute from downtown Jerusalem or a 20-minute commute from downtown Tel Aviv, and are not particularly politically involved at all. Students, please. Can I give a little preference to students? Because I want students to ask questions. Please. Somebody, a student. That's why you come to universities.
In front.
Yes.
I was hoping you could touch on the many attempts by the Israeli government to pursue peace with the Palestinians and what seems to be a constant rejection of even the acceptance or recognition of Israel in existence by the Palestinians.
Well, we're at a very sad juncture in our relationship with the Palestinians. Palestinians sort of hold the world record for a people that has been most frequently offered a state and have turned it down. have turned down the offer, and they've turned down the offer most frequently with violence. That was the case in 1947 when the UN first offered the two-state solution to partition Palestine, as it was then known, into two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. Palestinians turned it down, and they made war. It's not often remembered, but in 1979, Jimmy Carter at the Camp David Accords also offered the Palestinians a 5-year plan culminating in Palestinian, beginning with autonomy, but culminating with sovereignty, that the Palestinians turned down with violence. 2000, then Prime Minister Ehud Barak at Camp David offered the Palestinians a state pretty much along the 1967 lines. They turned it down. The result was the Second Intifada, in which 1,000 Israelis were killed, violence. In 2008, then Prime Minister Ehud Olmert offered Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas an even better offer than his predecessor, than Yasser Arafat had received from Barak, turned it down. Now, for the most of my tenure, I've been in this job close to 3 years, the Palestinians have refused to negotiate with us. They refused to sit down with us. They just walked away from an attempt to jumpstart the talks in Jordan, in which we made some very forthcoming offers. And they walked away. Instead, they're trying to make a reconciliation pact with Hamas, which calls not only for the destruction of Israel, by the way, but if you read its charter, it calls for the murder of Jews worldwide. It's a genocidal organization. And they are trying to get Israel condemned for war crimes in the UN. They've turned to the UN to try to get the UN to recognize Palestinian statehood without actually making peace with us. Not a very felicitous situation, I must tell you. Very sad. The remarkable thing, truly the remarkable thing, is that the majority of Israelis continue to believe and uphold the notion of a two-state solution. Between 70-80% of the people of Israel, and I can speak for my own kids here, support the notion of a two-state solution, even with all the pain, even with all the risk. And we're talking about huge risk, because if we looked at what happened in Gaza, if what happened in Gaza happens on the West Bank, we're in very, very serious trouble. If there were 100,000 rockets being fired at us from the West Bank, we're in very serious trouble. They continue to support it. Unfortunately, that almost a similar majority of Israelis do not believe that there's a Palestinian partner that is either willing or capable to actually sit down and make that solution with us. Because I'll be very frank with you, we'd have to make some painful, I don't want to belabor this term, painful sacrifices, both of territory and risk, but the Palestinians also have to make some very painful sacrifices. They have to give up their dream of having the descendants of refugees from 1948 come back to pre-67 Israel. Big sacrifice for them. They have to create a little state between Israel and Jordan, not a lot of natural resources, not a lot of outlets to the sea. They also have to make some painful sacrifices. There is no shortcut to peace. There is no shortcut to peace. We both have to make these sacrifices. We both have to, bite the bullet literally and make peace together.
What is your current status with the Israeli-Iran conflict at the moment?
Israeli-Iran conflict. What is our status? Listen, Israel is the only country in the world that has been threatened and is threatened regularly, almost daily, with destruction. The Iranian leadership comes out and says, we want to wipe Israel off the map. And even if we were a country that didn't have the particular history that the Jewish people have, we'd have to take that very, very seriously. Particularly since we have a leadership in Iran that is on one hand denying the Holocaust, and on the other hand developing the nuclear means to perpetrate a second Holocaust. 6 million Jews in the state of Israel today. And a number with a certain resonance. And we have to take it very, very seriously. Beyond that, Iran has supplied 50,000 rockets to its proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon. By the way, that's an arsenal that is almost unmatched anywhere in the world. 50,000 rockets. Those rockets can hit any city in the state of Israel, from Metula in the north to Eilat in the south. They have given over 10,000 rockets to both Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. They have perpetrated terrorist attacks against some of my colleagues around the world in recent weeks. Though it is not widely known, it's more widely known that they tried to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to Washington earlier this year, but they also try to blow up our embassy. Right? They are involved in terror in South America. They are actively supporting, actually propping up, the heinous regime in Damascus, the Bashar al-Assad regime. They have effectively taken over Lebanon. Iran is doing all of this without nuclear weapons. Can you imagine what Iran would do with nuclear weapons? And we would be one of its primary targets. Not its exclusive targets, but its primary. They're telling the world they want to wipe us off the map. So the status is, as President Obama said, Israel has the right, and beyond the right, we have the duty to defend ourselves against this. We have every option on the table. One of those options, as I said earlier, is a diplomatic option. We hope that the international community will prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons through crippling sanctions and a credible military threat, because only a credible military threat will work. It worked in Libya, and that's what got Muammar Gaddafi to get rid of his nuclear weapons. We need that type of threat today, but we will always reserve the right to defend ourselves. That's why we went back to our homeland. That's why we recreated that state. So Jews would never again have to be defenseless.
Why did Israel recently cut ties with the UN Human Rights Council?
The Human Rights Council is a body that exists. It is sort of like a bad oxymoron, the UN Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council passes dozens of resolutions every year. Somewhere in the vicinity of 93% of them are against Israel. All right? They don't pass human rights violation decisions against Saudi Arabia, against some of the countries in the world again that are where with this human rights. When Libya was actually the chairman at one point before Muammar Gaddafi's fall. Believe it or not, you can't make this stuff up. Libya was the chairman. North Korea, right? There's actually in the charter of the UN Human Rights Council, the article number 7 calls for constant condemnation of Israel for human rights violations. It's the only UN body like it. It's the only international body that actually exists to condemn Israel for human rights violations. Would you stay in a body like that? You know?
Hi.
Where are you?
I'm over here. Hi, sorry.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Banahamo. I'm a senior here. I actually have a question that's a little bit not in vogue at the moment, but I'm curious a little bit about the relationship with Israel and Turkey and how the United States can play a pivotal role in that relationship. Obviously, over the last 10, 15 years, that relationship's had ups and downs, taken some turns, and I'm wondering what you could comment on the role of the United States in bridging that gap.
Prior to 2002, we had a very, very close relationship with Turkey. Turkey was one of our closest allies. We had joint military maneuvers with them. We had a tremendous amount of commerce between them. Somewhere in the vicinity of 400,000 Israelis every year would vacation in Turkey. We had 6 flights a day going to Turkey. I used to go to Turkey. It's a wonderful country, great food, great people, good beaches. And then in 2002, Turkey had an election and a different government came to power, a government that was much more Islamic-oriented, was turning away from Europe and back to the Middle East, by the way, not without justification. And Turkey had tried over the course of 80 years to be accepted by the West and wasn't accepted by the West, so they turned back to the roots. The irony was, if Turkey had been accepted into the EU, the irony of that would be that Turkey would now be bailing out Greece. All right? They're not. But unfortunately, they stopped their maneuvers with us. The tourism continued for a while. The commerce continues, but a different orientation with Turkey. And it was unfortunate, and matters reached an apogee with the flotilla incident of May 2010 when a Turkish-supported extremist group, it's actually a group that IHH, that is recognized as a terrorist group by 2 European states, right, led a flotilla to bring supposed aid to Hamas in Gaza. There was actually no aid there. And we warned the flotilla to be intercepted. We intercepted the boat with our naval SEALs. Of the 16 boats in this flotilla, 15 surrendered, turned around. 1 did not. That was the one that had these IHH thugs on board, and they beat up our SEALs, and they returned fire, and 9 Turkish nationals were killed. So this created a tremendous furor in our relationship, and Turkey demanded that we apologize for it. We cannot apologize for our soldiers defending themselves. We can't. And when we have a citizens' army, that would break the very fundamental fabric between the State of Israel and the Army of Israel. We couldn't do that. It would also send a wrong message to the region. But what we did something extraordinary. We did something almost borderline insane. We submitted the flotilla issue for arbitration by the United Nations. This is the same United Nations that has the UN Human Rights Council, where the General Assembly last year of 26 resolutions, 23 condemned Israel. We submitted that for arbitration, and miracle. We live in the age of miracles. The UN found in our favor. The UN upheld the legality of our maritime blockade of Gaza, because the maritime blockade is the way that Hamas gets its missiles through Iran, and the missiles are being shot at Israeli civilians. So the UN said, listen, you got to have a naval blockade. It also suggested, it found fault with the way some of our soldiers acted, and we accepted that criticism. We didn't agree with it, but we accepted it, and the UN made 3 recommendations. The recommendations were, one, that we express regret for the loss of Turkish life, that we pay compensation to the families. They recommended that we engage in a dialogue with Turkey to improve our relationship, and they recommended that we maintain the maritime blockade. We accepted the UN resolutions. Turkey rejected them, unfortunately. Now, since then, we are trying always to ameliorate our relationship with Turkey. We understand it's not going to be going back to the way it was. We're not Pollyannish, but we think it can be better. We hope it can be better. We respect Turkey. We understand that Turkey is a serious regional power. It has an ancient and venerable tradition. And we have traditionally, there has been a very close relationship between the Turkish and Jewish people. They were the people who gave us sanctuary from the Spanish Inquisition. Always a good relationship between the Turks and the Jews. We look forward to improving that relationship, and it is a work in progress. We're working on it. We hope that it can be improved.
Ambassador, are you willing to take 2 more questions?
Okay. Who has the 2 best questions on the planet? That always gets like half the people to lower their hand.
So
if you ask them real quick, maybe we'll get 3. Real quick.
You stated that Israel was America's ultimate ally, and as your role as ambassador, I was wondering how you deal with a bipartisan government where there may not be complete support for Israel, and there are people like Ron Paul who say you should just not give support to Israel or any country.
That's a small sort of isolationist group in Congress, very small. But Israel is one of the few issues today in American politics that enjoys complete bipartisan support. And when I walk up on that hill, people are really happy to see me because I'm a source of where everyone can get together around the table and agree. And I will say this unequivocally today. Listen, bipartisan support for Israel is a paramount Israeli national interest. And maintaining that support as bipartisan is crucial for us. We do not want to be a wedge issue.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for coming today. I was wondering if you could comment. You assert that Israel is the U.S.'s ultimate ally. I was wondering if you could comment on what happened aboard the USS Liberty in 1967.
Oh boy, you really want that's like a 4-hour lecture here. I give a lecture on that. Oh boy. Well, listen, I have a book called 6 Days of War. You read the chapter on the Liberty. And since then, virtually every document related to the Liberty has been declassified. Liberty, I have to go into doing, I'm going to do this really, really quickly. Liberty, June 8th, 1967, a U.S. spy boat, the USS Liberty, appeared off the coast of Sinai where Egyptian and Israeli forces had been fighting. The fighting was over. People on Liberty didn't know the fighting was over. And Israeli planes and torpedo boats could not recognize this. It saw a military ship off the coast of Sinai. The people on the boat said that we're flying an American flag, but we have the transcripts of all the conversations between the Israelis. They did not see the flag. They opened fire on the boat, and before they did realize that it was an American ship, 34 American servicemen were killed. And it remains a source of some controversy to this day, but since the declassification of all the documents, including the NSC documents, including the transcripts of both the U.S. spy plane and the U.S. spy submarine that was in the vicinity at the time, and the publication of our documents. It shows that this was a case of mistaken identity. Mistakes were made all around. The NSC was an NSA boat. Sent it into the middle of somebody else's war zone without telling anybody, not telling even the U.S. Naval Attaché in Tel Aviv. We made a mistake by maybe shooting too quickly and not looking more closely at the boat. In wartime, I'll tell you as a soldier, you see a military craft that's not yours, you shoot at it, and that's the first rule of survival in warfare. A terribly regretful instance. We offered compensation again to the families. You don't hear about it that much, but just to the news, I think today you will see that the United States accidentally killed 24 Pakistani soldiers in a raid several weeks ago, and the United States found that it bore no guilt for this, that there were mistakes made on all sides, on the Pakistani side, on the American side. And I'll tell you, friendly fire in warfare is one of those horrible realities, and I know it personally. In 1982, my armored column outside of Beirut was struck by Israeli warplanes, and 24 of my fellow paratroopers were killed by Israeli warplanes in broad daylight, and our vehicles were marked. It happens, and it's terrible, and it should never happen again. I got to end on a higher note than that. I just can't end on that. Yeah, these poor people way in the back. Yeah, okay. Can we get him? And we'll get one more in the front. We'll get one in the back. Yes, sir. Sir with the beard. Yes, sir. Because you're up in the stratosphere there. No one can see you. Yeah. I can hear you. Shout.
I was wondering, I gave a very good account of the history of the U.S. Israeli rioting. I was wondering if you could comment on, if it's possible at all, if it's ever going to be possible for Israel to have a similar right to any other country in the world, where there's something similar to the United States or has the United States in any other country in the world.
No, and we have strong relations with China. Our trade with China went up 100% last year. I got a son living in Shanghai who speaks Chinese and works for an Israeli-American company there. We have a very large Russian speaking population, so we have a close relationship, a cultural relationship with Russia, but there's no substitute for the U.S.-Israel relationship. Because of the parameters that I mentioned. It's that spiritual connection is so deep. It is so deep. The shared democratic values, and the fact that you have this country which is unequivocally pro-American, and which shares its technology, which shares its commerce, which shares its innovation, which shares its intelligence with the United States. The United States also gives aid to Israel. The United States gives Israel something in the vicinity of $3 billion a year in aid, which is the equivalent of about half the cost of a missile boat today. I mean, it is a considerable amount of money, but it's not what it once was. But that aid, 75% of which is spent in the United States and creates tens of thousands of jobs here, is more of a symptom of the relationship. It's part of an indicative. It's one of the features of the relationship than it is a feature of it or a mainstay. And that aid shows that there are these unbreakable bonds between this little country in the Middle East, which provides the United States with so much, and in return sees so much. Not just aid, but in spiritual support, in political support in the UN and other international bodies. There's really nothing like it. It's sui generis. It's sui generis, and it's why my position as ambassador is unlike the positions of any of my colleagues in Washington. It's very, very different.
Please join me in thanking the ambassador.
Thank you. Sorry.
Two specific aspects of the Arab Spring. What do you foresee a solution or relationship of Israel with a potential post-Assad Syria, and also with a Muslim Brotherhood Egypt, especially with the USA?
Well, Egypt really is in support of the continuation of the aid. We see it as we see the Egyptian army as talk about mainstays, one of the mainstays of the Egyptian-Israeli peace and stability in Egypt, and we hope that aid can continue. The conditions will prevail that will enable that aid to continue. Of course, we have our concerns about some of the parties that have come to power in Egypt, but they have said that they intend to maintain the Israeli-Egyptian peace, and that's what is most important for us. We wish them well. We wish the Egyptian people well. With Assad in Syria, we want him gone. This is a man who's been has the alliance with Iran. He has basically been the occupier of Lebanon for many, many years now. His departure would deal a blow to that alliance with Iran. It could liberate Lebanon. There's no way of knowing who would replace him, but it's hard for us to conceive of someone who would be worse. Our major concerns are two: refugees. We are preparing for an onslaught of refugees, Alawites, Druze, Christians. Anybody who is affiliated with the regime is going to come across that border if he's overthrown. And Syria has one of the largest WMD arsenals in the world. And it is our big fear is that what happened in Libya, that when Muammar Gaddafi fell, a lot of his arms found their way into our neighborhood. We're afraid that this WMD would fall into the wrong hands. And we are in close communication with the Obama administration, with the Pentagon, about ways to perhaps prevent that or deal with it in case Assad does fall. Here's your answer. All right. West Orange. West Orange. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.